Okay, recording.
Yeah, there we go. Cool. All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Phil Whitrock. I'm the UX lead in Mountain View for Google, and I work on kube control. Fabio, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. My name is Fabiano Franz. I work on OpenShift for the last a little more than 5 years, and mostly doing CLI stuff. Since the first version of OpenShift, we are now in version 3, which is based on Kubernetes. So I do both web, UI, and also CLI development. And I'm based in south of Brazil.
I can continue. So my name is Stefan Szymanski. I'm also at Red Hat working on OpenShift, not specialized on the CLI, but have an interest in CLI topics and did a couple of PRs recently. So that's why I'm here. And based in Germany.
So hello everyone, this is Tony. Okay, I'm from China. I work in Alibaba, and okay, I work on kube control, and I'm really glad to join this group. Hope I can do something.
Hey, I'm glad you can make it, Tony. What time is it?
I think it's a little bit late. It's almost 12.
Okay. I'll go. I'm Brian Grant. Maybe some of you know me. I've been on the project since more or less the beginning. I worked on Borg at Google. Before that, I created concepts in Kubernetes like pods and labels, and a bunch of the basic ways in which kube control works were inspired by some of Google's internal tools, as well as some lessons learned from those internal tools. So happy to see a lot of people interested in helping out with the CLI.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mengqi Yu. I'm work in the kube control in the UX team with Phil. I'm work for Google in Mountain View.
Cool. All right. So Fabiano, I see that you put some meeting dynamics topics on here. Do you want to lead those?
Yeah, sure. That's going to be real quick. As I mentioned to you, Philip, for me, it's the first SIG I'm actively involved with. So I noticed that some of the other SIGs, they formally have a process for adding demos for the weekly meetings. So things like demos, some teams I noticed they do formal status updates like in Scrum, status. Some other teams doesn't do that, and some teams take some time to discuss the new open issues in their weekly meeting. So anyway, I added that as a real quick discussion about how we want the dynamic of our SIG meetings to work. So do we really want to have things like demos and status updates, or much more like, people add topics to the calendar and we go over them? So the idea is to have this meeting for the SIG-CLI every 2 weeks. So it's bi-weekly, not weekly actually. But do we want to do something like that, formally have demos, status updates, or just, add individual topics that people go over during the meeting?
I have an opinion. Not surprisingly. So I would like to not have an official demo place in this meeting because there's already one in the community meeting and in SIG apps. And I think, for the it's important for those demos to have the right set of people to provide feedback on the demos. So I think having some users present is important, for example. So I think those other places are better forums to have demos on a regular basis. Now, if someone's developing something new in Kube Control, I'm not opposed to a demo if it will help inform design discussion or things like that. But I would like to do things like status updates. I would like the team to operate as an extended team across organizations effectively. I think SIG Node is a good example of a team that functions that way. So I am in favor of some time for status updates and newly opened issues to help us prioritize what needs to be done. And also, if there is a major design thing like the extensions proposal, I would like some time to discuss that. And clearly, yes, if someone has an agenda item, we should have a call for agenda before the meeting and give people an opportunity to add agenda items.
That definitely works for me. So what I have in mind was much more like on-demand stuff. So if we ever have any topics that we would like to discuss, people can edit them during the week, before the meeting, and we can go over them. And for status update, yeah, that's something we do here in OpenShift also. It works pretty well. I think for us specifically, we probably don't need to be really formal like Scrum, like everyone goes over the status update yesterday, today, things like that. So, but I think it is nice to have some kind of status updates in that team, even because we are going to have meetings only every couple weeks. So it's nice to understand what everyone is really working on.
I think especially I agree about the Scrum thing. I think if there are features in Kube Control that warrant issues in the features repo, for example, that someone's trying to get into the release, it's helpful to keep tabs on whether those are on track or not. And speaking of which, almost any feature you add to the system impacts Kube Control in some way. So I think SIG-CLI could be a good forum for people from other SIGs to come to discuss changes they want to make. Like the cluster lifecycle SIG has been doing a bunch of CLI stuff. SIG apps, probably will have some CLI related things, maybe some of the other SIGs. So
yeah,
I think we should explicitly invite them now that we have a SIG that they should come and discuss their design, Kube Control design things here.
Yeah, absolutely. Here in OpenShift, we also have something like that. We have a CLI team here too. And however, CLI is something that every other team can actually work on, right? So definitely people from other SIGs also work on CLI stuff eventually. So we have something similar, people from other groups join our meeting to discuss about design, especially when there are new commands, something like that being added. So yeah, that sounds good to me. And other than that, the other thing I scheduled this meeting every couple of weeks for 15 minutes. 50 minutes. So how does it sound to you guys? Is that enough? Sounds good?
That sounds right to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that sounds right to me.
Okay, cool. So
I don't think we need it more frequent, if that's what you're asking. And we can adjust the amount of time based on whether they're agenda items or not.
okay.
Some of the SIGs cancel most of their meetings. Hopefully that won't be the case in this. We'll find this meeting useful, but we can play it by ear.
Okay, that's it for me then, Philip.
Great. All right. So on to the next item. Brian, do you want to lead the vision statement piece?
Yeah, we don't have to come up with the vision statement right now, but I think it would be useful to have a documented vision statement, as well as probably a roadmap for some long-term direction. there is a document called roadmap, although it's not actually a roadmap. But in the community repo, if you haven't seen it, there's a kubectl roadmap wiki page, which groups a bunch of the outstanding issues that need to be addressed with kubectl. Yeah, it's like that roadmap document, but replaced with kubectl.
Yeah.
But I think since a lot of other teams do work on kubectl and a lot of community members find kubectl an approachable area of the system to work on and one that they interact with quite frequently, having some statements around what we think kubectl is, what we think it should do, what its conventions are, what do we see as the roadmap will help people understand how they should contribute. There is a conventions document for kubectl. It is mostly targeted at kubectl developers. We probably need a version of it targeted at users as well to help users understand how to use kubectl in general. But the developer-focused one, I think there are a bunch of things we could add to it. So when people add new commands or change commands, they understand the conventions they need to follow. Things like which command should take the -- file name argument and how should they behave. Kubectl in general is designed for most operations that make sense on multiple resources, for those operations to be able to apply to multiple resources in a single command by specifying a file containing multiple resources or even multiple files or a directory or even recursively traverse directories. I'd actually like to extend those capabilities. That's one of the areas in the roadmap wiki page to make kubectl even better at consuming multiple files, multiple resources, multiple URLs. There was a PR open by DIMS. I don't know if that ever converged to try to address that. Did that ever go anywhere, Fabiano? Do you remember?
No, I don't remember.
So probably it didn't. Probably it stalled.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to add something related to conventions. I'm not sure if everyone is aware, but recently I got a PR merged that added a new script called in Hack called Verify CLI Conventions. So it's kind of a framework that runs on Make, so that, and it's very, the idea behind it is to have small scripts that verify if your CLI commands are following the conventions we have. And if it doesn't, the script fails, and actually our tests fail, meaning that people writing CLI commands are now must actually follow the conventions we are testing in those scripts. So right now there are only two really simple checks being done. It's just checking if your examples and the command examples and the long description is normalized. But anyway, the framework is there, and we could add other checks to that. So things like you mentioned, Brian, and for example, check if every command under kubectl create has a dry run flag, things like that. Those kind of stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So the framework is there, and it's very simple to add new checks. So just for us to be aware.
Yeah, we should also have ensure that all the commands get tested adequately. That is definitely a problem that we have currently. That either there aren't tests or the tests that we have are flaky. Yeah, I guess some of the SIGs have a if there are a bunch of sort of standing issues, since we're just starting, we might want to make a list and spread them over several meetings. Like I do know that there are things we need to discuss, like the the issue that was opened about, do we have one command line tool to rule them all, or 2 command line tools, or 50 command line tools? What belongs in each command line tool? Things like that. There's also the extensions proposal. What problems is that trying to solve? What changes do we need to make about how the tools are built and released? I feel like we definitely, sorry, Phil, am I going too fast? All right. We definitely need to be able to distribute multiple tools. Like we already have, Minikube, KOps, KubeAdmin, KubeControl, Compose, Helm. I really don't think it's viable to link everything into a single binary. Nor do I want to. I mean, I actually want these things in separate repos and separate GitHub orgs. I want kind of an ecosystem of tools to develop. I saw, that happen inside of Google, and it's a very powerful thing. As I think certain classes of users understand their problems better than we do, and certainly, there will be people who use Puppet or Ansible or whatever it is who also build Terraform, who also build adapters, right? So people are going to be using multiple tools. So if we design the tools in such a way that they can be used together, I think users would benefit from that. So there are some, in terms of the sort of the roadmap and the vision and the conventions, there are some things that we've discussed for a long time that we should make sure that we're all on the same page about. Long-term directions, like, multiple interoperating tools is one. Making most of KubeControl's generic functionality available in a reusable library is another. Right now, people do it. It's a pain to vendor in. I don't think the code you can just do go get because of the sprawling dependencies. And there are some annoyances like KubeControl business logic just uses, takes input from standard input and output to standard output. So you sort of have to, you can't just like pass in a string and get back a string and things like that. It's not designed to be used as a library. So I think there are a bunch of things in that. And also really complex, commonly used functionality, we want to actually push all the way to the server. So moving KubeControl rolling update into deployment is one example of that. That enables deployment to be, rolling updates to be triggered by CI/CD, by UIs, by all kinds of scenarios where they may not want to invoke exactly command line tool. Similarly, we're moving cascading deletion to server because every API client that does deletion pretty much wants to be able to do cascading deletion. And having that logic in the client is a backward compatibility problem because it makes it harder for us to make changes into the relationships between objects. So anyway, there are a bunch of complex things like that. I mean, it makes sense for them to start in KubeControl because KubeControl is easier to implement these things for various reasons and doesn't have the same API contract. But once it's clear how it should work and how useful it is, then some of this stuff will probably move to the server. I guess another long-standing issue is long-ish standing issue is support for dynamically registered APIs and for third-party resources. So how to deal with extensions. OpenShift has its own solution, I guess, to how it adds support for its own resources. But as we make Kubernetes more composable, so we can actually continue to grow, we will need, I think, a more principled solution to this. And I think is a proposal open for returning get and describe output from the server, I think. So that would be useful to talk about. at some point. Anyway, this is a little bit longer than I planned to go, but as you can see, there are sort of a long pile of standing issues, and we haven't really had the bandwidth to do all the design reviews and implement solutions to all these problems. So, having a team working together across companies, I think will be really helpful for making progress on some of these big issues. One thing that we're working on right now for 1.5 is making kubectl apply work. And for people, I don't know if everybody understands how kubectl apply is supposed to work, but basically kubectl apply is a declarative method for managing Kubernetes resources. You can just specify the resources and files. You can do kubectl apply, and the idea is it should make it so in the server without clobbering other state that wasn't configured by kubectl apply. So it's designed to be compatible with defaulting and auto-scaling and otherwise operationally set values, asynchronously set values, and so on. It's the basis for components, or for things like the add-on manager is going to use kubectl apply. It would make sense for Helm and other sort of configuration-oriented systems to use kubectl apply, either as a library or by executing the command. I believe Helm is using it as a library. I think there's an open question about how much of the functionality should eventually be moved to the server, but right now the implementation's in kubectl and it doesn't entirely work. So we want to actually fix all the quirks and bugs and whatnot, and actually make it work, since a lot of things are going to be depending on it.
One thing I'd add to that is the reason not all the bugs are actually in kubectl. A good chunk of the bugs are with how resource objects are defined in the server.
Yeah, and we also don't have a good way to communicate the information about the schema to kubectl that it actually needs to do the operation. So we'll have to, right now it's conveyed via struct tags, and it's implicit in how fields are encoded. So it depends on whether omit empty is specified correctly and whether the field is represented as a pointer or plain old data and things like that. So there are a bunch of quirks, and we don't have good testing for it. So I think there's going to be a lot of work to actually make it work correctly, but once it does, it's going to be worth it.
If we move it into the server, some of those, how we handle some of those might change, because relying on the struct tags isn't nearly as bad if there's not a version 2 issue. Is that correct?
Yes, but there are always going to be external orchestration clients that need the exact same information for similar reasons. Like if you have a UI with a form to update an arbitrary resource, then you would like to do the right thing if someone sets one field to unset the other field of a union. Right, so there are a bunch of things like that where, yes, some combination of fixing it in the server and the client, but I think we will want to represent this kind of structural information about the schema in Swagger somehow, regardless of whether we actually use it for apply. And Swagger is another thing where we use Swagger for validation, but Swagger itself is buggy. So we do have, that's more the domain of the API machinery SIG, but we do have someone fixing the Swagger issues, as well as moving to Swagger 2.0, Open API.
Yeah, but sounds like he's making a lot of progress on that. And I have to sync up with him, but he told me yesterday that he found a way to add extensions.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so as part of the vision document, I think spelling out the use cases would be useful. You know, we've been talking about apply, which, as I said, is a declarative way of managing resources. We also want to support imperative commands like kube control set, for example, which is really convenient for developers who aren't just committing all their configs into source control. So I think as part of the vision, capturing the main usage paradigms that we plan to support be a useful thing. And we'll need to decide where the line is between kube control and not only the other like kube ADM for administrative things, but also the line between kube control and Helm, I think is something useful to address explicitly somewhere. So I think I'm more or less done talking for now. That's plenty of fodder for future meetings. I could go on and on and on.
All right. Yeah, maybe we should vote on which of these topics we want to tackle and pick 3 of them or something like that for next meeting. We can do that out of band too.
Yeah.
All right.
And if other people have things they want to talk about too, I mean, we should add those to the list of future agenda topics.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, if anyone wants to add items, I think everyone has right access to this doc, and just add them here. And just make sure to throw your name in front of it, so if we have questions, we remember who proposed it originally.
Logical groupings of commands in the help text.
All right. Yeah, so I think there was a thread we had on this, and the thread was terminated with, let's discuss this at the CLI meeting, which we're here today, so I thought I'd bring it up. I think this kind of goes, has some overlap with Brian's support for imperative commands and what's the identity of kube control and its responsibilities and all that stuff. And it probably makes sense for our groupings to reflect the responsibilities of the tool.
It also relates to one of your next bullet items, the subcommands versus top-level commands.
Yes, it does. I guess, so those 2 items, I'll put them next to each other, but they should, I guess the higher point is how do we want to structure the kube control tool, both for part of its discoverability. Part of it is also for, it makes it harder to have a logical group of flags for a command if you have a top-level command that can do a bunch of different things and some mutually exclusive sets of flags and such. Let me copy the list I had in here.
I think maybe it's controversial, but I would ask, does there only need to be one way we group them? Right, like if you are reading a book, there's a table of contents and an index. Or if you are learning about some system, there's a user guide and a reference guide, right? So I think there should be a default organization, similar to the top-down nav of the doc site maybe, which is sort of a logical organization. but we may also need some other kind of organization like task-based or something like that. You know, if the division is imperative and declarative, that's not going to be, like, almost all the commands are going to be imperative. So that's not a useful division in the sense it's like pathological n squared quicksort because you're only like taking one thing out.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, I think it's fine to have multiple groupings for different contexts. I guess I'd say the trade-off there is to the extent we can, if we provide the users with a consistent view of the system, when they switch context, things will be hopefully more familiar. So if our docs group commands the same way as we group them in other ways to encounter them.
Oh, yeah, docs are generated from kubectl help also.
Yes.
So by the way, I think kubectl help is a big area that needs improvement. So that's another useful topic for future meetings, is what we want to do with kubectl help. We don't have to derail on that here, but there are a bunch of issues like just updating it, how we manage the examples, do we generate markdown or multiple different formats, or how do we do that? So, you know, help needs a lot of help.
Yeah, I'd say I have my last 5 minutes on that. One thing I discovered is I attempted to make the docs a little more discoverable, and I found that the help it was hard to get an exhaustive view of the system with the man pages or the -- help, because you have to constantly type in commands to get to subcommands, and so it's hard to say like I've walked to the entire tree.
Right.
And so there's certain areas I just wasn't exploring. But Brian, to your point that maybe imperative and declarative was the wrong way of thinking about it, but I guess what I was thinking is, from user's perspective, I may be either coming to the command and I want to set stuff through flags, so I'm doing kubectl run, I'm doing create secret, I'm doing delete deployment X, and all these things I never see config, right? And I'm not managing anything through the config. And then there's another set of commands that does include like create, replace, delete with files, and those are, while you're right, those are imperative commands. They are managed through a user having a configuration file.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
That will also allow us, by separating those out, users who don't, the class of users who is maybe turned off by a config or scared by a config or whatever reasons we have, kubectl run and kubectl expose, we can show to them like, here's all the other commands that are safe for you to look at without having to figure out config stuff.
So it's like convenience commands and CRUD operations.
Right.
However we want to name them, that's the split. I also think, you know, you have other lists here, cluster management. Cluster administration or cluster management operations. I think separating those from app management.
Yeah.
Debugging and inspecting also makes sense. There may be some commands that make sense to put into multiple categories, like get is a CRUD command, and it can be used for scripting and stuff, but it's also the main inspection command.
Yeah. Get, even create, because create we have subcommands that are not config based, and then we have create that takes a file.
Yeah. Actually, so that's another brings up another future topic, which is we've had some people request declarative forms of the convenience commands. So like a declarative form of kubectl run or kubectl create secret is probably the biggest single request for a declarative form.
We have that now. Do you mean adding additional stuff to it?
I mean, people want to do kubectl apply and have that also do create secret. Like
Oh,
if their underlying credentials file gets updated, then it will update it in the server. Right, or this so-called 3-parameter 3-line config or whatever. So like a declarative form of kube control run. So you can just specify a container image, basically, and then cause it to create a deployment or something.
right. It's like a hybrid.
Yes. So I think there's an interesting question there, which is what is the benefit of doing that as opposed to a simple script that just has a few commands? And I think one of the benefits maybe is the error handling. Like if you write a script, then every line of that script, you have to be pretty careful about the error handling. So you have to decide, do you want to keep going and execute the subsequent commands, or do you want to stop at the first error and all that stuff? That's kind of annoying. One advantage of kube control apply, especially with just pointing it at a directory and even recursively traversing it, is you can just drop another file in that directory. So if you have some sort of CI/CD or other automatic reconciliation of your configs, just doing kube control apply based on a webhook or whatever, then you can just drop another file in that directory and it will get pushed just automatically, and all the error handling and stuff is generic and will just work. So if you can figure out a way to accomplish the equivalent of that, then maybe that would satisfy people's needs. But sorry, I took us off the topic of logical groupings.
Okay, yeah, I mean, if these, I mean, this is something we can probably tweak if needed, if it's just used for help right now.
Yeah. So on the logical groupings, is there an open PR or just a proposal on the email thread, or?
Just a proposal in the email thread. If I can put together a PR for this.
We have some logical groupings now, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, we do. We have a simple group.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that the change I was suggesting is the grouping now is based on, I guess, the complexity, or at least partially based on the complexity of the command. And I'll add that the groupings really helped, actually, help the help text. And this is pretty close to what the existing groupings are, but it collapses, it just reorganizes a couple of them. So there's like advanced commands, beginner and intermediate commands.
Okay. And so the categories you have listed here seem like a reasonable starting point. If we get user feedback that is confusing or whatever, we can always change it again.
Sounds good. All right, moving on to the next thing. Subcommands versus top-level commands. I had I forget who it was. Someone came to me the other day asking how to add commands for cluster federation.
Nikhil, maybe?
Is probably Nikhil, yeah. And I think the question I had for him was, you can make them, you can make like a top level federation command, and
Command group.
commands of that. You could, or alternatively, you could embed. So if like, I think there were some commands that already did what he wanted. I forget what they were, but it was something like join. I think join was one of them. And there was this idea that there might already be a join command. So alternatively, you can make a subcommand of join or control it with flags against join.
Right. Okay. So my general opinion about subcommands is if there are a bunch of the kube control commands are designed to apply to arbitrary resources, like create, delete, label, etc. Those definitely should not be under a subcommand. On the other hand, commands that are about some specific concept or set of concepts that are not generally applicable, and especially if they're not going to be used by the majority of kube control users, then it does make sense for those to be grouped under a subcommand. I think it aids discoverability and comprehensibility. You know, so kube control rollout was kind of the first one of those that we added. You know, they all just relate to rollouts, maybe of a couple of resources, like maybe they'll apply to deployment and daemon set and pet set. Sorry, stateful set. But it's still sort of a focused activity with a small number of resources. It's not something that's generic across many resources. Contrast that with kube control set, which doesn't apply to all resources, but could eventually apply in some way to all resources. Maybe not the same fields would be settable by in all resources, but certainly at least the ones we started with for pod, like set image, applies to anything with a pod or pod spec, right? So it applies to pod, it applies to all the controllers. And it's intended to be generic and common, and we plan to add support for more fields that might cover other things. So, you know, so those sort of generic things should be top level. Non-generic things should not be top level. I like the idea of either having some kind of cluster admin subgroup or moving those even to another command. I apparently have a disagreement with Joe Beta about what kube admin is supposed to do. Like, Joe is a big fan of everything in one binary, and I just think that's the wrong way to go. So we'll have to hash that out with him. I don't know if anybody else cares. But on the federation stuff, I don't know that they have I mean, honestly, I told them what they should do is just build a separate command and put the commands there. And once federation is more fully baked and whatever, we can think about merging the tools. But they didn't want to do that.
This is a separate command line tool.
Yeah, a separate, like kube fed or whatever, a separate command line tool. You know, like only the people using federation will care about it. Is noise for everybody else. It would be easier for them to actually develop if it were in another repo. They can just develop it independently until such time as that it's all fully baked and more people are using it and whatever.
Yep. I mean, that goes. I think if we solve some of the tool distribution problems, that'll be an easier sell.
Yeah, I know Clayton is of the opinion that distribution is solved by the OS distros, but that is no longer the case, especially now that there are OS distros with no package managers, right? So I think for anybody who hasn't looked at the DCOS command line tool, it's kind of interesting. It's worth a look for comparison. And they have their own plugin distribution mechanism. They can pull plugins by HTTP. I'm not saying we absolutely have to go that way, but I think it is useful to understand the other options that are out there.
Which one is that, Brian? Sorry.
That's the DCOS tool
Okay.
from MapleSphere.
Yeah, I know that. I think it's Cloud Foundry. Also, CF also has something specific for plugins, so you can do something like CF install plugin. I don't know, Jenkins, something like that, and it actually downloads and installs via HTTP. I did some R&D in past about both something like that and also a self-updater command. If we want to take a look at that, I probably still have that on GitHub. Anyway, there are some solutions for things like that if at some point we want to discuss.
Google's G-Cloud tool has a way of updating itself, for example. And if you look at how people don't, well, I don't know. It seems like people don't consistently keep their distros up to date. So even if we were able to get up-to-date builds of kubectl and the other tools into an updated packages for Debian and for RPMs, we couldn't count on people updating to those. And we also have a lot of people use kubectl on Mac. I know I do. And a number of people use it on Windows, and more will use it on Windows, presumably once Kubernetes supports Windows containers. So, that's at least four OSs, plus Raspberry Pis and other things. So, it's not something to take on lightly, but I think it is worth thinking about, especially if we do add an extension mechanism.
Yeah, definitely. If we don't, do something like a self-updater or something like that, but at least we should warn users that they are using an outdated version of the CLI tool. I could, of course, switch that something off. Not sure if that's in a compiling stage, something like that, so that users that, for example, use RPMs would not be notified and would just get the new versions from their OS updating system. But anyway, as you said, for Windows, Mac, and a lot of other users, we should at least let them know there isn't something that's not up to date.
Yeah, so that reminds me of two long-standing issues that we should try to fix. One is we should actually make kubectl work with version skew. Like, we should make an older version of kubectl able to work with newer clusters, and vice versa. If you're just using the subset of functionality that that's been existed for a while, there shouldn't be a reason why you have to use a newer kubectl. But today you do. It basically doesn't work because kubectl round trips objects, and that causes it to drop fields and things like that. So you can't reliably write scripts that do read, modify, write without an up-to-date kubectl. And there are a bunch of other problems. So we should do things like eliminate all the round tripping, make sure it doesn't drop any fields unintentionally, make all the version negotiation and API discovery stuff work, make extensions work, things like that. So then it will actually work with version skew. And the second thing, what was the second thing? Up to date. I don't remember the second thing anymore. All right, maybe I'll remember it later.
Okay, guys, just in terms of organization, we are 55 minutes in meeting now. Do we want to continue or call it a day and we continue now in 2 weeks?
Well, it's really late for Tony, and I probably talked enough. So I think we should go ahead with the logical grouping. I think there's no reason to to continue to debate that if people don't have any radically different ideas. You know, in terms of the other things, we can.
Yeah, I would say, Philip, open a pull request for it. I'll probably have some minor comments about the wording, but overall, yeah, it looks pretty good.
Okay, great. And just one last thing, I won't spend any time on it here, but I added a link to some docs prototyping I'm doing, which just skins it a little differently. I plan on presenting those at the community meeting tomorrow.
All right. Yeah, I saw that already. It's looking really nice. That was all generated docs from kubectl, right?
Yeah, it's all generated.
Nice, very nice.
Cool. All right. So I guess I'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, guys, so much.
Great.
So nice meeting with you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So